Eat less. You look like a bloated, ugly grunt. No different from those uneducated supply depot wives. You're a stain on this family. Why don't you look at your sister? Slim, graceful, refined. My mother's hand shot forward and shoved my plate of grilled meat down the oak table so hard it slammed into the centerpiece, knocked over a wine glass, and sent barbecue sauce splattering across the white tablecloth. The room went dead. Every fork froze mid-air. 50 pairs of eyes crawled over my body, the swollen frame of a woman rebuilt by 3 surgeries, the burn scars that crept above the collar of my dress blues. I didn't hide them anymore. Every ribbon on my chest was physical proof of what I'd survived. 2 women near the buffet exchanged a glance. Not horror, not sympathy. The quick, satisfied glance of people watching someone else's daughter get punished. Nobody said a word. Nobody intervened. My hands clenched under the table until the knuckles popped white. Lips pressed into a line so tight the scar tissue on my jaw stretched and burned. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, because if I opened my mouth, if I let a single sound escape, I would either scream or cry, and this woman had taken enough from me without getting that, too. The solid oak door blew open. Master Sergeant Harper walked in with long, heavy strides that split the crowd down the center. Her heels struck together a single, dry crack that silenced even the ice in the glasses. Several guests stumbled backward. 2 security guards froze mid-step, locked in place by the fury rolling off her tailored charcoal suit. No uniform, just the unmistakable, lethal bearing of an active-duty Marine. She planted herself between me and every person in that room. Her voice came out low, fractured, each word landing like a round hitting a target. "You mock this body, ugly." It was destroyed by the blast pressure from an ammunition depot explosion at Camp Lejeune. She crawled into a wall of fire, dragged 6 recruits out with her bare hands before the roof caved in and crushed her. Every dollar of that $203,000 you've stolen, that's blood-soaked disability pay. That is her life. The challenge coin, blackened by smoke from that same explosion, dropped onto the table. It rang out sharp and bright in the dead silence. My mother stumbled back, legs buckling against the table edge, the color draining from her face like water from a cracked glass. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved toward her, but Harper was only the surface of the iceberg. What truly destroyed my mother that night began with a text message of just 3 words at 9:17 p.m. 3 weeks earlier. If you've ever been betrayed by your own blood like this, hit that like button so this story reaches more people, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. May 28th, 2023, 9:17 p.m. I slid down to the cold hardwood floor of my apartment on the outskirts of base housing. The shrapnel lodged near my spine had no appointment schedule. It just fired whenever it wanted, electric jolts that turned my legs into dead weight. Darkness filled every corner. The only light came from the street lamp bleeding through the blinds and the pale glow of a bourbon bottle sitting on the coffee table, cap still sealed. That bottle had been there for 11 months, a test I ran on myself every night to prove I didn't need it, to prove the pain hadn't won. My reflection stared back from the glass surface, burn scars crawling up my neck, shoulders broadened from carrying body armor since I was 19, eyes that had logged too many things the brain was never built to store. The phone screen next to the bottle showed 2 unanswered texts from this morning, both from Mom. The first, "When is next month's transfer coming through?" The second, 3 hours later, You know I have bills, Iris. No. How are you? No. How's the pain? Just the monthly invoice disguised as motherhood. I'd wired $3,600 last month from this exact floor, lying in the dark at 3 a.m. because the shrapnel was screaming, and she'd spent it before the direct deposit notification finished loading. My hand reached for the bottle. Fingers touched cold glass. Right then, Goggins' voice punched through from somewhere deep in the marrow. When you think you've hit rock bottom, you've only used 40% of what you've got. I pulled my hand back, set my jaw until the bone ached. 1 breath, 2, 3. Tactical breathing, 4 seconds in, 4 hold, 4 out. The one thing that woman could never take from me. The phone buzzed against the hardwood. Not a ring, a vibration. The sound of someone who doesn't dare make noise. Screen lit up. My sister. 3 words. I'm still okay. I was on my feet before my knees registered the pain. Hit the coffee table edge hard. Didn't care. I was decoding. In 2008, during the nights our father came home throwing furniture at walls, I taught my 13-year-old sister an emergency protocol in the dark. 2 phrases, 2 meanings. I'm okay, everything normal. I'm still okay, someone is watching the screen. Do not call for help. 1 word still changed everything. 15 years, and that word still carried the same charge. This wasn't a hunch or a gut feeling. This was a protocol, field-tested in the worst nights of our childhood, designed for exactly this scenario. She hadn't used it since the night our father broke the kitchen window with his forehead. The fact that she was using it now, directed at our mother, told me everything I needed to know about what that house had become. I laced my boots in the dark, didn't turn on the lights. 9:31 p.m. I called Diane, the retired neighbor, 65, lived 2 houses down from Mom. I kept my voice flat, casual, 0 tremor leaking through. Diane, how's my sister been lately? The hesitation on the other end lasted less than 2 seconds. For me, those 2 seconds were a full confession. Diane talked. My sister had dropped weight, fast. Mom fired the housekeeper at the start of the month. She had my sister scrubbing every floor in that oversized house daily, on hands and knees, despite her right knee being swollen with acute joint effusion. I said nothing, thanked her, told her to keep this between us. My molars ground together until my jaw throbbed. Classic technique exhausts the victim's body until they have no energy left to think about escape. I'd read that in the Counter-Psychological Warfare Manual. Never thought it would apply to the house I grew up in. 9:34 p.m. I composed a text to Mom, every word calibrated like a field order. I'll stop by tomorrow to pick up my winter jacket. Hope everyone's well. Sent. Started counting. Less than 10 seconds. Reply bounced back. We're fine. The typing speed was physically impossible for a 60-year-old woman supposedly resting for the evening. No greeting, no mention of my sister's name, just we, the language of someone controlling another human being. I pulled on my leather jacket, covering the wide scar on my left wrist. OODA loop activated. Observe, orient, decide, act. I stepped out the door without turning on a single light. I'd survived darker places than this. I remember that night exactly, because the next morning was my history final, the textbook still open on my desk. Winter 2008, our father came home at 2 a.m., the kitchen window shattered, not the first time, but that night, my sister didn't make it to her room in time. I stepped between them, back against the wall, arms spread wide like a concrete barricade. He looked at me, then walked away, maybe because my eyes held no fear, no begging, just the cold calculation of someone measuring the distance to the nearest exit. That was the first time I understood that discipline and emotional control were weapons stronger than anything he was holding. After he passed out, I sat on my sister's bed in the dark, whispered the protocol. 2 phrases, 2 different meanings. She nodded, her eyes wide, committing every syllable to memory. I had no idea that 15 years later, that code wouldn't save her from a drunken father, but from a sober mother 100 times more dangerous. The man who beats with fists leaves bruises. The one who attacks with words leaves wounds that have no color, no shape, and never fully close. My mother understood this long before either of us could name what was happening. 3 memories cut through fast and sharp. I don't let them linger. Full scholarship to State. Mom asked why it wasn't Ivy League, like her friend's daughter. Then called her bridge club to complain about how unmotivated her eldest was. Captain of the varsity swim team. Broke a school record at the state championship. She missed it because she had a brunch with her society friends. I found out later she'd told them she was dealing with Iris's behavioral problems. I told her I was enlisting. She glanced up from her mirror and said, "Well, I suppose you had no other options," then turned back to her reflection, as if I'd already left the room. At my graduation from basic training, one of the proudest days of my life, I scanned the bleachers 3 times. She wasn't there. My sister told me later that Mom had spent the day getting the house ready for a dinner party. She never mentioned the graduation. Not that day, not ever. My sister was different. Small, gentle, never talked back, easy to control. Mom put her on a pedestal, not out of love, but because the obedient child is the child you can mold into whatever shape you need. The golden child and the scapegoat, I'd later learn the clinical terms from a VA therapist. But at the time, all I understood was that no matter what I achieved, my mother's eyes slid past me like I was furniture. I saw the pattern from the time I was young. I just didn't know how to stop it. Right now, sitting in my car, staring at the dark street outside my mother's house, was not the time to drown in the past. I used the technique from trauma recovery. Touch a physical surface. Steering wheel under my palms, seatbelt across my chest, the old scar in the center of my left hand. Pull the mind back to the present. Memory doesn't solve problems, action does. I checked the time, 9:47 p.m. The light in her living room was still on. OODA loop, approached the target. I opened the car door, stepped out, killed the flashlight. April 2019, 6:43 a.m. Ammunition depot, Section D, detonated without warning. I was running an equipment check 40 meters from the blast point. The shockwave threw me to the ground like a paper doll. Ears went dead. Eyes saw nothing but white smoke and red fire. But in those 11 seconds before the brain processed enough information to feel fear, I heard screaming. 6 recruits trapped in the adjacent section. Nobody was trained for this, except me. I crawled into the fire, not because of bravery, but because the Corps had programmed a reflex into my nervous system. No one gets left behind. This wasn't heroism. This was absolute submission to the highest principle I'd ever been taught. I pulled the 6th one out right as the superheated metal roof collapsed. 4 pieces of shrapnel buried into my back and shoulder blade. The blast pressure cracked 3 ribs. Third-degree burns covered 30% of my upper body. I woke up in the ICU, surrounded by strangers in uniform. Harper sat in the corner chair, eyes bloodshot, hadn't slept. No one from my family was there. Not Mom, not my sister, who at that point was already living under our mother's roof, and whose phone she controlled. Not a single person who shared my blood. 6 months of recovery, 3 surgeries. The first to remove shrapnel fragments pressing against my spinal cord. The second to graft donor skin onto the third-degree burns across my shoulders. The third to reconstruct the damaged tissue on my left jawline, where molten metal had fused to the bone. Physical therapy every day until my body shook when I lay down at night. During those 6 months, my mother called exactly twice. The first call, "When does the disability check start coming in?" The second call, 3 weeks later, "The mortgage payment bounced. I need you to sort it out." No visit, no flowers, no, "How are you feeling?" Harper sat in that corner chair for 14 hours the first day. Mom couldn't be bothered to pick up the phone for 14 seconds without mentioning money. My VA disability pay was classified at the highest tier, permanent combat injuries affecting lifetime work capacity. The direct deposit hit my account on the first of every month, $3,600. By the third of every month, she had already called with a story. Bank debts, utility shutoffs, medical bills for conditions she never named. I'd pull up the transfer app on the same phone I used to schedule my physical therapy, tap in the amount, hit send. The money would leave my account and vanish into hers before the pain medication wore off. She started requesting more after the second surgery. "The roof needs emergency repair." And again after the third, "Your sister's medical bills are piling up." I never called the bank, never asked for receipts, never once typed her account number into a search to see where the money actually went. Because the guilt of leaving the family to join the military sat heavier than shrapnel. The guilt of being alive when part of me should have died in that fire. So I sent money every month, $3,600 wired without fail, and she spent it on Nordstrom bags and hotel rooms with a man named Kellerman before the direct deposit notification finished loading on my phone. In the military, we have a word for someone who steals from a wounded soldier's pay. There is no word because it is so far beyond the boundary of acceptable human behavior that no one ever thought to name it. Sitting in my car outside that house, one stubborn question refused to dissolve. How much have I sacrificed, and what is my family using my sacrifice for? The answer wasn't vague anymore. It sat clear and cold under the suburban streetlight, and that clarity pushed me out of the car. I still remember the day I woke from the first surgery at Camp Lejeune ICU. White ceiling, hands bandaged from elbow to fingertip. I turned my head to the right, corner chair. Harper sat there, spine straight as a parade ground, despite the obvious fact she hadn't slept. Red veins cracking across her eyes, hands locked on her thighs. When she saw me looking, she didn't say a word, just a nod, a military nod. "I'm here. You made it. You're not alone." That was the only moment in 6 months of hospitalization where I didn't need tactical breathing to hold myself together. 6 months later, unit mess hall, she pulled a chair across from me, set 2 black coffees on the table, didn't ask if I wanted one, just placed them like a declaration. Then she spoke. "The 6th one you pulled out, that was Sergeant Morrison's son. Kid was 19, enlisted the month before. Morrison doesn't know what you did. I didn't tell him because I knew you wouldn't want that. But I know, and that's why I'm not going anywhere." She paused, stared into her cup, then added something I hadn't expected. "I was the one who put you on the equipment check that morning. I signed the schedule. If I'd assigned someone else, you'd still have a body that didn't set off metal detectors." Her jaw locked, eyes went wet for half a second before the military training swallowed it. I stared at the coffee, couldn't look at her. If I had, I would have broken, and I hadn't cried in front of anyone in 6 months. But now I understood something I'd missed. Harper, sitting in that ICU chair for 14 hours, wasn't just loyalty. It was a debt she believed she owed with her life. 2 weeks before the night of May 28th, she had asked point blank at my apartment, "How much money have you sent home this year?" I gave her the number. Her face didn't change, but her hand tightened around her coffee mug. And what did she do with it? I had no answer. That was the first time I realized I'd never asked. Then my phone buzzed. "Mom, rent is going up. Send extra." The silence between us stretched until it hurt. Harper watched my face change. She didn't press the issue, but she didn't have to. The seed was planted. 2 years before, it started with a reasonable excuse. "I worry about you driving alone late at night." My sister, already conditioned by years of unfavorable comparisons, handed over the car keys without argument. The sound of those keys dropping into the wooden drawer in our mother's bedroom was small, almost inaudible, but it held everything. A week later, Mom accidentally placed my sister's wallet in her own dresser drawer to keep it safe. The next month, she proposed co-managing the bank account because I know how to save better than you. 3 months in, my sister's direct deposit from the library where she worked was rerouted into our mother's account temporarily. "Until we pay off this debt your father left." The debt was a lie. Each step came wrapped in the language of care. My sister never realized she was being systematically stripped of every means of independence, because in the vocabulary of a covert narcissist, all of it is called for your own good. Then came the social network. Small comments about my sister's friends. "That girl looks untrustworthy." "That boy just wants to use you." One by one, each friend vanished. Not because Mom forbade them outright, but because my sister could no longer go out on time, had no money for coffee, had no phone that wasn't inspected every evening at 9 p.m. sharp. The friend who kept calling got the treatment last. Our mother answered my sister's phone one afternoon and told her, "She doesn't want to talk to you anymore. She's going through something personal." My sister didn't find out until months later. Social media was frozen with the excuse, "You need a mental break." When she was completely isolated, Mom replaced the entire network with herself. "I'm the only one who truly understands you." The prison was complete. No bars, no locks. Just a daughter who had been convinced the outside world was dangerous, and only the warden was safe. 6 months before the night of May 28th, my sister started crying for no reason. Spontaneous tears at the kitchen sink, in the hallway, standing in front of the bathroom mirror. A normal neurological response to prolonged captivity in a controlled environment. The brain reaching its limit and leaking pressure the only way it could. Our mother seized it immediately. "See, I told you, you're not well. You need me." She didn't take my sister to a therapist because a therapist would see the real problem within 2 sessions. Instead, she prescribed a regimen of natural rest. Stay home, don't go out, reduce stimulation. The library fired my sister after 6 weeks of unexplained absences. Mom had been calling in sick on her behalf, without telling her. She lost her last remaining connection to the outside world. The last paycheck came and went. Our mother absorbed it without explanation. This was when I started hearing the change in my sister's voice over the phone. Slower speech, shorter answers, and long pauses where there used to be laughter. Eyes drifting away every time I asked, "Are you okay?" The voice of someone who had stopped believing they deserved to answer that question honestly. What I didn't know yet, my mother wasn't just controlling my sister to satisfy her need for power. She needed her there to maintain the facade of selfless mother, the perfect shield to hide a financial crime. While my sister scrubbed floors and I wired disability pay home, she was funneling everything into a personal account and bankrolling a boyfriend 20 years her junior on the south side of the city. Ryan Kellerman, 39, no stable employment, living off regular transfers from the account of a respectable widow. Buried in that same account's transaction history, a boutique hotel receipt bearing our mother's name alongside Kellerman's, dated 1 month before my hospitalization. She'd been running the affair while I lay under the surgeon's knife at Camp Lejeune. Nobody suspected the sacrificing mother could do this. That is exactly why it worked perfectly for 2 years. But arrogance breeds carelessness. 9:51 p.m. I parked half a block away, headlights killed, before turning onto the street. Approached the house through the security camera's blind spot. I'd mapped the camera positions 3 months earlier during my last visit. Through a gap in the living room curtain, my sister knelt on the carpet, scrub brush in hand, shoulders trembling. Her right knee was wrapped in a bandage. Mom stood in the corner, Merlot in hand, watching her with the quiet satisfaction of someone inspecting the results of their labor. No yelling, just watching. That was absolute power, the kind that doesn't need words, because the other person has already shrunk into nothing. I stood outside that window without moving. The anger in me did not ignite. It solidified into a block of ice, cold and heavy and impossible to melt. 3 rings on the doorbell, rhythmic, deliberate, not urgent, not polite. A declaration. The door cracked open. She froze. I didn't answer her question. Turned sideways, drove my shoulder, hardened like steel from 10 years of armor, through the narrow gap. She pushed. I didn't shift. My voice came out flat, not a ripple on the surface. "I'm here to see my sister," she hissed. I didn't argue, didn't explain, just called out her name. One word, not a shout, a command voice trained for 5 years to cut through concrete walls without raising volume. My sister came running from the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, exposing a large bruise on her wrist. Not the blue of fresh impact, the yellow-brown of an old wound healing. Her eyes darted to our mother in rapid, panicked flicks, a reflex hardwired by thousands of punishments for looking the wrong way. Mom stepped between us. "You're scaring your sister, you monster." I turned my gaze on her, held it for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to transmit a complete message without a single word. "I see what you're doing. I will not let it continue." Nothing more. I turned to my sister, voice 1 degree softer, but still a command. "Come help me carry the box of books from the car." Outside, out of our mother's sight, she collapsed, the way someone does when they've been so exhausted they have no tears left, just ragged, gasping breaths. "Iris, save me." I placed both hands on her shoulders, the grip of a commanding officer, not a sister. How bad? She told me everything. 2 years, no money, no keys, no friends, and a voice in her head saying she couldn't survive without Mom. I listened, didn't interrupt. Then I gave the order. Tomorrow, find every way to copy financial records, bank statements, any device you can access. Can you do that? She looked up at my scars, nodded. The first decision she'd made for herself in 2 years. That nod in the darkness was the first time in 2 years she chose something on her own. And I know that feeling, when you have to relearn how to trust yourself after being suffocated for too long. If this touches something in you, hit that like and share in the comments. What do you wish you'd had the courage to do sooner? I sat in the car, engine off, staring out the windshield, opened the notepad on my phone, started writing witnesses, timelines, data to collect, priority sequence. My hand didn't shake. This was familiar territory, building a tactical plan in the dark, alone, with incomplete intel and a deadline that couldn't slip. I'd done this before, deploying into conflict zones. The only difference was the enemy this time didn't carry a weapon. She carried a Chanel bag and a glass of Merlot. Didn't matter. A target is a target. June 18th on the calendar. 3 weeks. Days 1 through 7 after May 28th. My sister and I communicated through a mobile game app, a channel our mother never monitored because she considered video games beneath her. Each day she sent fragments of intelligence disguised as in-game messages. Mom's daily schedule. Gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Actually a cover for meeting Kellerman at a cafe on the south side. Her drinking pattern. Tipsy by 7 p.m., bath from 7:30 to 8:30 every Friday. Third glass poured at 8:15 like clockwork. The iPad's location, vanity table in the master bedroom screen, lock disabled because nobody in her domain dared touch her belongings. I compiled the data and mapped the target's behavioral pattern, a technique from the 2015 intelligence training course. The enemy always repeats a pattern. Repeated patterns create openings. By day 5, I had our mother's movements charted on a 24-hour grid. Friday night was the window. The bath was the distraction. The iPad was the vault. Week 2, Friday, 7:37 p.m. Mom soaking in the tub, second glass of Merlot finished 20 minutes ago. iPad left on the vanity screen unlocked because, in her mind, the concept of someone in this house defying her was structurally impossible. My sister approached under the pretense of fetching a bath towel from the shelf 6 feet from the vanity. Her hands were still wet from washing dishes. She wiped them twice on her shirt before touching the screen. The iPad's Face ID had been bypassed by our mother's wine-dulled habit of leaving it permanently open. She opened the banking app, personal savings account under the name Evelyn Whitfield. Lifetime inflows, $203,347.82. My sister took a screenshot, swiped to the transaction history. Incoming deposits matching exactly the amount of my VA disability pay, plus 100% of her withheld library wages. Then she swiped to the outflows, where the balance was being systematically drained. Nordstrom, Neiman Marcus, a boutique hotel in the Valley, and a recurring monthly transfer to the name R. Kellerman. She used her phone to photograph the iPad screen 4 times in 45 seconds. Closed the banking app, replaced the iPad at the exact angle she'd found it, and walked out with the towel. At 7:52 p.m., safely in her room, she sent them through the game app. Total exposure time, under 2 minutes. Our mother's bathwater was still running. I received the screenshots at 7:52 p.m., sat in my car, and stared at that number for 2 full minutes without moving. Not from shock, from the brutal clarity of it. $203,347.82. I did the math without needing a calculator. 43 months of my full disability pay at $3,600 a month, plus every dollar of my sister's library salary until she got fired, plus God knows what else she'd scraped from old accounts our father had left. She wasn't just skimming. She'd built a calculated system. Fabricate a family financial crisis to justify funneling all money into a single point, her own account. Every emergency bill she'd cited over the phone, every story about mortgage payments, every guilt-laden voicemail about falling behind on utilities, fabricated, all of it. Every dollar I'd wired from that cold apartment floor at 3 a.m., with shrapnel burning in my spine, gone into department stores, hotel suites, and a man's rent check. I ran the name R. Kellerman through an active intelligence database. Ryan Kellerman, 39, no stable employment, residential address on the south side, same district as the recurring transfers. The picture assembled itself without commentary. She'd been funding him while my sister scrubbed floors on a blown-out knee, and I lay under surgical lights at Camp Lejeune. 11:43 p.m., I called Harper. She picked up on the first ring, hadn't been sleeping since I briefed her on my sister's situation. I went straight to the point, intelligence report style. Entity, charges, evidence on hand, evidence gaps. She listened in total silence. When I stopped, she asked one question. How long? I looked at the calendar. June 18th, my mother's annual Father's Day party. The one day she assembled her entire high society network under one roof. 3 weeks. Harper didn't hesitate. I have a contact at the VA OIG field office. We hand them this intel, they fast-track the subpoenas. The financial fraud scale alone is enough for an emergency injunction. During the filing process, Harper uncovered a critical detail. My mother had received a prior VA investigation, warning 2 years ago, but escaped because the file lacked hard evidence, and her private attorney got the case dismissed. This meant she knew her behavior was criminal, and she continued anyway. Conscious repeat offense. Harper added it to the file as proof of intent, the factor that determines federal sentencing severity. When I received this information, I wasn't surprised. I just added one line to my notepad. Escaped once, won't escape twice. Night of June 17th. I texted my sister through the game app, arrival time, where to stand, how to receive the legal folder. She replied instantly, I remember. No question mark. First time she'd written a sentence that didn't end in one. I set down the phone, opened the closet, pulled out the dress blues, hung them on the door hook, looked at the medals on the chest. Tomorrow wasn't a ceremony. Tomorrow was sentencing day. And the verdict wouldn't be read in a courtroom. It would be read in the middle of the criminal's own party. June 18th, 2023, 7:45 p.m. I arrived late, deliberately waited until the party hit its peak. The guest count reached capacity, and my mother was riding the crest of her perfect mother performance. The dress blues weren't for ceremony. Every ribbon on my chest was physical proof of what I'd endured to earn the money she was spending. I slipped the challenge coin into my breast pocket, its surface blackened by smoke from the depot explosion. Harper parked 2 blocks away in her tailored charcoal suit, waiting for the signal. This wasn't a random appearance. This was a staged operation with exactly one target audience. The elite crowd my mother had invested her entire life cultivating. I stepped into the dining room. She spotted me immediately. Her eyes swept fast, evaluating, calculating. The smile she'd been wearing for her guests flickered for half a second. She'd seen the dress blues. She'd seen the medals. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not fear yet, but the first twitch of an animal sensing a change in the wind. She chose to strike first time for the exact moment the room was laughing and chatting, so the attack would inflict maximum humiliation. She shoved my plate, scraping down the oak table. The words hissed through her teeth. The same words she'd been using since I was 12 years old, sharpened now by decades of practice, and aimed at my surgical scars in front of 50 witnesses. The room went dead. The involuntary freeze that happens when people witness something too cruel to pretend they didn't hear. She smiled. She thought she'd won the opening round. She thought I'd do what I'd always done. Absorb it. Swallow it. Walk away with my fists clenched at my sides and my teeth grinding down to dust. She had just triggered the signal I'd set 3 weeks ago. When she attacked in public, Harper walked in. The solid oak door blew open. Harper's strides were long, heavy, splitting the crowd. Her heels struck together. The crack rang through the upscale gathering like a starting pistol. Guests shrank back. 2 security personnel locked up, pinned by the lethal energy rolling off her charcoal suit and the face that held zero hesitation. She planted herself between me and the room. Her voice came out low and fractured, not weak, but strained from holding back something far larger than anger. Nobody laughs. Not at her. 3 words. The room died completely. Harper locked eyes with my mother. Not the look of someone arguing, but someone reading an indictment. She recounted Camp Lejeune, not with emotion, with facts. Date, time, Section D, the alarm that wouldn't stop. She described the fire and the smoke and the 11 seconds before fear catches up. Then she called out all 6 recruits by name, full name, unit, hometown. Private First Class Danny Morrison, age 19, 2nd Battalion from Decatur, Illinois. Each name fell into a silence nobody dared break. A woman in the back of the room pressed her hand over her mouth. A man near the bar set his glass down and didn't pick it up again. Her voice dropped lower. Every dollar of that $203,000 you've stolen, that is blood-soaked disability pay. That is her life. The room shifted. My mother's closest friend, the woman who'd stood at her elbow the entire party, who'd helped plan the guest list, who'd co-hosted the brunch last spring, took one quiet step to the other side. Then another. Then she turned and faced the wall. Nobody moved toward my mother. The silence around her widened like a blast radius. She staggered backward. Her legs buckled against the table edge. For the first time in her life, her face lost its architecture of control. Narcissistic collapse. The moment a mask is torn off before the exact audience it was built for. Her mouth opened, but the sounds that came out weren't words. They were the broken mechanics of a machine losing its last gear. At 4:47 p.m. on Friday afternoon, right before the courts closed for the weekend, Harper had texted me 2 words. Freeze confirmed. The federal court order had been active for 48 hours. Every account, every transfer, every cent. My mother just didn't know it yet. I gave a single nod. My sister stepped forward from the far corner of the room where she'd been standing behind 3 guests, invisible, exactly where I'd told her to position herself. Her hands shook, but her eyes didn't look down, didn't dart to our mother for permission. first time in 2 years. She walked straight to Mom and pushed the legal folder square into her chest. Her voice didn't crack. "This is a copy of the federal asset freeze order, effective as of Friday afternoon. The VAOIG investigators are waiting in the driveway." Our mother's head snapped up. The mascara was running. The Merlot she'd been holding had shattered on the tile. At some point, a dark stain spreading under her heels. "No, you wouldn't dare!" My sister held her gaze. I already did. I set the challenge coin on the table. Gentle, no explanation. The coin wobbled in a small circle, then settled. The ring, sharp and bright, cut through the absolute silence. She slid to the floor, not faking. She physically could not stand. Her crying filled the room, and nobody stepped forward. Not one guest. The people who'd spent years admiring her stood and watched the mask hit the ground, and not one of them could pretend they hadn't seen it. I didn't look down. I looked straight at the door where 2 federal agents were walking in. 3 days after June 18th, I woke at 6 a.m., military internal clock, no alarm needed. Opened my phone. No new messages from Mom. The absence hit different from how I expected. My thumb hovered over the message icon out of pure reflex, the same way I'd checked for her demands every morning for 3 years. Nothing there. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and walked to the kitchen, poured coffee, reached for the sugar out of habit, then stopped. I'd been adding 3 spoonfuls every morning since the burn ward, something sweet to cut the bitterness of pain medication aftertaste. The medication had been done for 8 months. I put the sugar back, drank it black. At the same time, an email from VAOIG appeared on screen. Confirmation that restitution would be processed within 90 days. The number on the screen matched the number my sister had photographed on that iPad. Every dollar accounted for. I sat at the counter and stared at the email for a long time. Not because I needed to reread it, but because this was the first morning in years where the first thing on my phone wasn't a demand from the woman who gave birth to me. 3 months after June 18th, Evelyn Whitfield was sentenced in a federal courtroom that smelled like cold air and old wood. The charges, federal veterans benefits, fraud financial document forgery, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The forged signatures on my old civilian bank accounts were entered as Exhibit 14. Harper had found them buried in her home office during the federal raid 3 days after the party. Signatures that looked close enough to mine to fool a bank teller, written while I was sedated in post-operative recovery at Camp Lejeune. The judge read the sentence without raising his voice. Stripped of all assets, ordered to repay every stolen dollar, $203,347, plus interest, plus court fees that would follow her for the rest of her life. She lost the house. She lost every friend. The society circle that had admired her for 2 decades went permanently silent. Nobody called. Nobody wrote. I wasn't in the courtroom. I'd submitted my victim impact statement in writing the week before. 3 pages, no adjectives, just dates, dollar amounts, and a single paragraph describing what it feels like to wire money from a hospital bed to a mother who never asked how the surgery went. My sister was there because her attorney needed her signature on asset recovery paperwork. When the judge's gavel came down, one decisive strike, no echo, she felt nothing for 1 second. Then a single tear rolled down. Not a victory tear. The tear of someone mourning a mother-daughter bond that should have existed, but never actually did. She told me later she didn't know who she was crying for, the mother she lost, or the mother she never had in the first place. 1 week after sentencing, I walked with my sister to a studio apartment downtown. 5th floor, overlooking the park, flooded with light from a wall of windows. She stood in the center of the empty room, looking around. Her hand held a pen over the lease. The hand shook, not from fear, because this was the first time in years she was allowed to sign something that carried only her name. I leaned against the wall in the corner, back to the surface, old military habit. Nobody needed to say anything. She signed. I gave her a nod, a military nod. You're good. You did it. Nobody can take this from you. That evening, I opened my contacts, scrolled to the name Evelyn Whitfield. My finger hovered over the delete button. I sat with that moment for a while, not hesitating, but wanting to fully understand what I was doing and why. This wasn't anger. This wasn't revenge. This was the act of someone redrawing the borders of their living space. Who gets to exist inside it and who does not? She made her choice a long time ago. I was just accepting it. I pressed delete, set the phone down, looked out the window. Outside, it was dark, but morning always comes. 6 months after the trial. I woke at 6 a.m., hand shot to the nightstand, reaching for the phone the way a soldier reaches for a weapon at the sound of an alarm. Fingers touched the screen. I stopped, pulled the hand back, placed it flat on the mattress, looked out the window instead. The sky was shifting from purple to pink. No emergency text, no danger code, no call that needed answering. For the first time in as far back as I could remember, the morning didn't begin with a problem to be solved. I stayed in bed 5 extra minutes, not lying there, but actively fighting the reflex to swing my legs over the edge and start moving. The reflex that said, rest is weakness, stillness is exposure, peace is the moment before the next explosion. That 5 minutes was the hardest exercise I'd ever completed, harder than the 3-week covert operation against my own mother, because the enemy wasn't out there anymore. The enemy was the programming inside my own nervous system that refused to believe the war was over. I showed up at the military-assigned therapist's office, something I'd refused for 2 years. The woman behind the desk asked, "What's the hardest thing to heal for you?" I thought for a long time before answering, not because I didn't know, because this was the first time anyone had asked, and I decided to answer honestly. I don't know how to believe I deserve to be happy without earning it first. She wrote it down, nodded, no judgment. I looked out the clinic window. Goggins was right. Discipline isn't about not feeling anything. Discipline is feeling everything and still moving forward. 3rd Thursday. Phone buzzed. My sister calling, not texting, not sending a distress code. A straight phone call, like 2 normal people. Hello? Her voice was clear, no hesitation. Hey, I'm learning how to cook. I've ruined the soup for the 3rd time. Do you have a recipe? I laughed a real laugh, not the bitter kind. You bought the wrong tomatoes. Use crushed, not diced. A conversation so small it barely registered, but it was the first small thing in years she called to ask about. Not to request permission, not to report, not to beg for help. That was the call of a free person. End of the day. I looked into the mirror, something I'd avoided for years. Burn scars on my wrist, my shoulder, my left jawline. The bloated, ugly grunt body that my mother weaponized against me in front of her guests. I looked at those scars for the first time without feeling shame. Each one was a story, not of failure, of 6 people who went home because I chose to run in instead of out. Of a sister who got her life back because I chose not to look away. I didn't need her to acknowledge that. I didn't need any of those elite guests to remember my name. At the unit that week, I noticed a young female recruit, maybe 22, sitting alone in the mess hall, eyes fixed on her phone, jaw tight. She'd been sending money home every paycheck. Her weight had dropped. She flinched when someone mentioned family. I recognized the pattern, the way a bomb technician recognizes wiring. I didn't give a speech, didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. I just sat down across from her, set a coffee on the table, didn't ask if she wanted it, and said, "I'm not going anywhere." The same words Harper never actually spoke, but said with every action for 3 straight years. Someday, that recruit might understand what the coffee meant. Or she might not. It didn't matter. What mattered was that someone was there. I only needed to look in the mirror each morning and know that the person standing there chose right, even when nobody saw the choice being made. Some scars never disappear, but sometimes they're the only proof that we chose to stand up instead of fall down. If this story left something in your heart, hit that like and subscribe to the channel. Then share in the comments, what have you had to let go of so you could keep moving forward?